everyone, welcome back to Z Talks with your host, Zaria Musgrove, where I talk about books, movies, and TV shows that relate to history and classic literature. Now, today I will be talking about the book Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid. This book I actually got as a recommendation off of TikTok from a creator I can't remember, but I really want to thank that creator for recommending this book because this book packed quite a punch. I was not expecting all of the things that happened in this book that really threw me for a loop because even though this book is small, it explores multiple themes that are actually quite heavy, but does it in such an artful and skillful way. And I would like to explore those themes with you in this episode and just talk about them and what the author was trying to convey. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, one thing to note about this book before I go into the book's outline, the plot, and just the themes in this book is that this book is semi autobiographical. The author, Jamaica Kincaid, whose real name is Elaine Richardson, is kind of plotting the main points and plot lines in this book for the main character Lucy against things that she actually experienced in her life. Because, like the main character, she also migrated from Antigua at a young age to work as an au pair in the US, specifically New York. But I say that it's semi autobiographical because even though the main plot points of the main character in this book are things that have happened in the life of the author. Some of the details have been changed, such as the main character migrates at the age of 19. Elaine actually migrated at the age of 16. And as you can see, some details, such as minor details like that, would have been changed, and just some other stuff that happens to Lucy would have been for the sake of the character and don't actually reflect the life of the author. But I said that just to say this is a semi autobiographical work, so that can give you some insight as to why the themes in this book are so strong and feel so compelling. So, this book follows Lucy, who, as I said, like the author, migrates from Antigua to be an au pair for a white American family in New York. Now, this book centers this main plot point, but in Lucy being an au pair for this family, we get to explore loads and loads of themes. And the first theme is the theme of disillusionment. Disillusionment. This is the theme that you are encountered with at first because when Lucy migrates, she is very excited. She really wants to chart a new path for her life, a new stage in her life that will mean a new beginning for her. And because of this, she really idealizes the US and idealizes all of the technology that she finds and specifically idealizes the family that she works for. And we start to see them in the beginning as, a perfect and loving family, specifically between the main characters of Lewis and Mariah, which are her employers. And as things go along, us as well as Lucy begin to see that there are cracks in her perception of the US, as well as her cracks in the perception of the marriage of her employers, which begins to make her feel disillusioned and begins to make her feel that maybe this new path and this new life that she envisions and has for herself isn't as easy or won't be as glistening and new from what she experienced in the past as she might have thought. And through this path of disillusionment that she has, we get to really zero in on the characters of Lucy herself as well as the character of Mariah, who is the wife in the marriage between Lewis and Mariah, who are her employers. And specifically, we get to examine the dynamic not only between Lewis and Mariah, but the dynamic between Mariah and Lucy, who, as the book goes on, develops a sort of bond, a sort of friendship with each other that is inherently flawed. Because as the book goes on and they develop a friendship, beginning from employer to employee, which kind of levels out into just two women trying to seek solace in each other, we begin to see the inherent power dynamics in their relationship, aside from the employer employee dynamic, power dynamics that relate to race and racism. And one of the moments in the book that really displays this really well is the reasons why Mariah migrated versus the reasons why Lucy migrated, because in the book we find out that Mariah actually comes from a family of migrants. Her family migrated to the US from Sweden, but she is white. So when she migrated, not she, but her family migrated from Sweden to the US, they immediately were able to settle into a position of economic stability and a higher position of economic class that Lucy herself does not experience from her migration from Antigua to the US. She is obviously an au pair and is experiencing, I would say, not poverty, but coming from a background of poverty and the scarcity mindset, and is experiencing a lower economic status than Mariah experiences. And this theme of class and background and race, which kind of emerges itself and puts itself to a head in their relationship, bleeds into another strong theme in the book, which is colonialism and migration. So, part of the reason that Mariah migrated to the US in the first place has to do with the time period that the book is set in, which we are assuming is immediately after 1975 or around that time, because the author also migrated in 1970, not 1975, but 1965. The author migrated in 1965, so we're assuming that the book is set in around this time as well. And in 1965 in the US, there were a lot of policy changes around immigrations and changes to the immigration flows to the US. So in 1965, the US changed its immigration laws to abandon the immigration quotas that it had for people entering the US, which led to an influx of people migrating there. And coupled with this influx of people migrating, you also had shifts in the social dynamics in the US, particularly the exodus of women from the home to entering the workforce because of the feminism movement in 1960s, and specifically women of color leaving jobs of domestic labor and entering into jobs such as clerical work or admin work, which really left a gap in jobs in the household and jobs in domestic labor that were previously filled by women or women of color. And this gap, coupled with the mass entry of migrants, kind of gendered the migration. So you had a lot of women entering into the US at this time period as opposed to men, specifically women from the West Indies. And another reason why it was specifically from the West Indies is because this is also the time that the UK was divesting its colonies. So this is post World War II period. The UK is kind of broke, and there are a lot of independence movies movements happening in its colonies and the Pan African movement as well. So Antigua, which was one of the UK's former colonies, gains semi-independence in 1967, which kind of puts its economy on the rocks and forces a lot of families to have some of their family migrate to other places, such as the US, so that the person that migrates can send remittances back home to Antigua to support the family, which is why Lucy migrates to the US in the first place. So, Lucy migrates to the US as this economic savior in order to save her family. She is sent by her mother to the US to get a job as an au pair and send remittances back home to support her family, which you can see why history matters so much in this book and informs the decisions that Lucy makes and the circumstances that she is in. And these circumstances and the decisions that she was forced to make by her mother brings out another central theme to the book, which is really, really pertinent if you want to understand this book, which is the mother daughter dynamic. So, one thing that might be jarring for people reading this book is the dynamic that Lucy has with her mother, which is that Lucy hates her mother. She despises her mother, but also can't help but feel the remnants and the existence of love for her. Because Lucy's mother, Lucy's was her mother's only child for a long time and was the apple of her mother's eye and got a lot of affection from her mother. But then her, three of her brothers were born in quick succession, three of them. And when her brothers were born, Lucy was kind of demoted and not seen as the apple of her mother's eye anymore. And her mother kind of saw her brothers as people that would take prominent places in society. And she ceased to see Lucy as a person that would take up space and be important. And her demeanor towards Lucy changed of one that was warm to one that was cold, and she saw her as kind of a means to an end. She saw her as the person that would fund the dreams of her brothers, which is why Lucy was pulled out of school. She was actually stopped from pursuing higher education, which directly mirrors the experience of the author, who was also pulled out of school by her mother and stopped from pursuing higher education and was designated as the person to migrate to the US and send remittances back home. But just like the character, the author and the character do the same thing and actually decide not to send remittances back home out of the animosity and, I would say, hatred that Lucy has for her mother, for not believing in her dreams and discarding her just hopes to be something more. So Lucy decides not to send remittances to her mother and doesn't answer any of the letters that her mother sends her and just goes cold turkey contact with her mother and her entire family for most of the book. And this feeling of animosity is central to the tone of the book because the book is actually quite angry. You have an angry character, so you have kind of an aggressive book where a lot of the decisions that Lucy takes is driven by this anger that she has for her mother and this want to distance herself from the idea of what her mother is and represents, which is the past, and just wanting to be any everything that her mother is entirely, which explains another theme which might be off-putting to people, which is why I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. This animosity and this need to be something different from her mother is why Lucy, the main character, goes on a lot of sexual exploits. So in the book, Lucy has a lot of sexual encounters, which is in her effort to be everything that her mother is not, which is sexually explorative because her mother is really chaste and really reserved, and Lucy doesn't want to be this, which is why she is very provocative and very out there in the book. And because of the strong theme, I don't know if I would recommend this book to everyone, but for the people that are not scared or put off by this theme, I would strongly advise you to view this theme of sexual exploits in the book through the lens of her trying to push herself as far away from her mother as she can, because this is essentially what is happening. But besides the anger that Lucy feels towards her mother, this anger is also directed towards Mariah. Because, as I said, in their relationship, the dynamics and the imbalances in power and racism and class kind of produces a sort of animosity from Lucy towards Mariah, which is kind of counterintuitive or just at odds with the fact that Lucy actually likes Mariah and adores her as a person, but can't reconcile this with the fact that Mariah represents everything that Lucy dislikes, which is this kind of white savior complex. Because Mariah, we kind of see this white savior complex unraveling in Mariah as the book goes on, because she sees herself as doing Lucy a favor by employing her and paying her good wages, which is something that you should just actually do if you're a good person. But she doesn't see this as such and kind of wants to pat herself on the back for doing this. And she wants to identify with something other than she is not, because as Mariah and Lucy share their past experiences of where they grew up and how they grew up, Mariah constantly wants to identify as someone that is oppressed or comes from a background that wasn't as privileged as she was, and wants to place a lot of importance on the philanthropic work that she's doing, which is coming from her own need to be seen as self important rather than actually wanting to help someone. And these philanthropic efforts are actually kind of hip- a hypocrisy and in vain. And there is a quote in the book, actually, which I'll read for you guys, which kind of sums up everything that Mariah is and everything that Lucy feels towards Mariah. And the quote is, how do you get to be the sort of victor who can claim to be the vanquished also? End quote. And I feel like that sums up literally everything, which is the fact that Mariah wants to retain her position of privilege within her relationship with Lucy, but also wants to identify with and as Lucy from a position of being less than in society in order to garner sympathy, which you can't do both at the same time. And it, yeah, that really sums up the relationship and the anger held there. So, as you guys can see, the themes in this book are vast and are really deep. And even though the book might be short, there's a lot to read into. So, if you want to read this book, I would say make sure that you're prepared for the themes, make sure that you just fully grasp what you're about to get yourself into, as the book is not for everyone. It's not a book for everyone, but if it sounds like it would be for you, go into it being open and realizing that this book is not just a made up plot, but actually reflects someone's real life lived experience, which would give you more understanding and empathy for the character of Lucy and how she feels in the book and why she acts the way that she does. So, yeah, I would say for me personally, I did like the book and I would rate it 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't rate it 5 out of 5 stars and give it a 4 just because even though I like the themes, I feel that at times the themes are a bit overwhelming or too overt, which is what the intention was by the author, so I can't complain about that. But just me, sometimes I prefer the style of these strong themes to be delivered in a way which isn't such a punch in the face, which is what the author intended, but it's just my personal preference. So I can easily see why someone would rate it 5 out of 5 stars, which I would agree with, but just in this instance, that is my personal preference. But yeah, that is all I have to say today about the book Lucy. As I said, I would recommend it, but not to everyone. Please think about and have a ponder on the themes before you read this book and see if it's really for you. And if it is, remember, have some empathy, be open, and think about the author when you read this book. So, yeah, um, that's all I have to say about Lucy, and I will be doing another episode in the next 2 weeks. But if you want to follow up with the podcast before then, you can follow Zeta Cesare Musgrove on socials, which is TikTok and Instagram. But if you don't want to do that, you can just wait another 2 weeks for another episode of Zeta.